nos va a hablar de luz, código y juego. Gracias, Chris.
Gracias. Okay, I don't know if we could turn the lights down. I have my slides are kind of dark, but if we can, that would be great. So first I want to say thank you to you guys for the presentations today. The projects are excellent. I read all of the proposals multiple times, but it's always nice to see you guys present them in person. And I think all of them are really intelligent and interesting projects. So I'm very excited to see how they develop over the next 2 weeks. Disco. Okay. And also a thank you to our translators for being here and translating everything today. All right, so I'm going to start. I'm going to talk a little bit quickly about my time in Media Lab as well. Several of the projects I've done in my own art practice. And as I mentioned this morning, and as Laura was saying, my first time in Media Lab was in 2007 when I was participating in the second edition of Interactivos. So this was me. Well, it's hard to see me, but I was doing my first iteration, first prototype of Delicate Boundaries, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, and which will be on display downstairs. And of course, getting to know the people at Media Lab for the first time was excellent, and I had, from the very beginning, a strong sense that this was a very strong community and had a great sense of what it meant to encourage collaborative process. And back then, the space was a lot smaller. We didn't have an auditorium and an exhibition space. There was no big LED facade. But the Media Lab family was still just as strong as ever. And so after that Interactivos, about a year later, Marcos, who, if you haven't met him, he's the director. I'm sure you'll meet him during this time. He told me I should, apply for a residency in Madrid and come back. And I said, okay, well, that sounds like a nice idea. And I came back for a 3-month residency in 2008. And I ended up staying here for 5 years. So watch out, you never know. And I collaborated very often with Media Lab. So I was participating in workshops, organizing different activities, teaching some courses here. And it's always been, a strong part of the development of my career. I really kind of pursued my artistic career during the time I was living in Madrid. And Media Lab was often my kind of office for a while. So being that it's the kind of 10-year anniversary, I asked a few people who had collaborated or participated in other workshops just to give a couple of quick thoughts on their experiences. So here's what they wrote me. This was Robertina, who organized a workshop an Interactivos workshop in Slovenia, and she said, it was in all of her time working in Ludmilla, this was one of her favorite projects while she was there. A good friend of mine, Damien, who I met in the first Interactivos I did, and we also collaborated on some projects afterwards. And he says, he was fresh from New Zealand when I landed at Interactivos for the first time. From knowing no one, I was introduced to a wide group of friendly, talented people in a lovely environment of sharing, collaboration, and cooperation. It was my introduction and welcome to the world of media art in Europe, and I still keep in touch with people I've met there on a regular basis. And this is very true. Damien and I have been in touch for a long time. 2 other friends of mine who I met in the first Interactivos, I went to live with them for a couple of months in Valencia, and other people I've had ongoing professional contact with. So you potentially could make really great connections here. And then this was Daniel Canogar. So that it was in his Interactivos, it was the first time doing an interactive piece, the first time I created a screen using recycled materials. This initiated an important body of work for me that in many ways I'm still immersed in. So I'm forever grateful for that experience and the freedom to explore what this workshop offered. I also remember the hundreds of light bulbs that kept on crashing to the floor and breaking when I tried to figure out how to hang them. Trial and error finally gave me the solution in what eventually became a curtain with 4,500 burnt out light bulbs. So you never know what's going to happen here. And I hope that you guys have a really positive experience, and hopefully it will be a lasting connection with Media Lab. And already some of you are kind of what I like to call returning customers. So some of you were collaborators in previous Interactivos or participated before, and I'm sure we'll see a lot of you back here again. Okay, so part 2. I'm going to show you some of the works that I've done over the past kind of 10 years. Primarily, they've been interactive installations. Although I've worked in other capacities, I've been involved in the open frameworks community, doing development for some time, and as well as other types of collaborative projects like the iWriter, which I worked on with a number of other artists. But I'm going to show most of the works I've done more installation works. And many of these have been in my opinion, they're kind of using clever bits of code and manipulating light to create these playful types of experiences that I like to say find a balance between being weird and being poetic. So the first work I'll talk about Delicate Boundaries, which, as I mentioned, I started here in Interactivos in 2007. It's this work with this LCD screen where you see a bunch of little kind of bugs or bacteria-like creatures swarming around and wiggling in very cute little weird manners. And if you approach the screen, they start to swarm towards your hand. And then the surprise in the piece is that they come out of the screen. So this illusion with the projection that these kind of virtual bugs want to crawl out onto the physical space, but only onto your body, right? And then they can crawl between people. I'm not sure if you can see that image too well, but so the original idea in this piece, I had been thinking about how to make a very personal, interactive space, and the concept was, okay, I will project right onto people's bodies. So instead of making kind of huge projections that are more of a performance, that this would be very kind of intimate space. And then it developed into a piece that also talked about our expectations of technology and this concept of what is virtual and what is physical or what is real. And in fact, after showing the piece sometimes, people will tell me like, oh, I can feel the bugs crawling on me. I can feel their heat. So obviously I did something right. So this is a bit of the setup. I think it's not it's something some of you have seen before, tracking with a camera from overhead. I completely faked the multi-touch screen that's just tracking with the camera. Sorry. Okay, we'll just skip that. I don't know what's going on with that. It's a ghost in the machine. Yeah, so this project was really about a type of illusion that can be created with something that's slightly lifelike, but not completely, and combining technology to create this type of illusion. So this is installing it in a festival for children. And there was, okay. There was a number of times I showed it, and once there was this kind of bug in the program, so like a bug in the bugs, where they wouldn't like regenerate. So people were really fascinated by this. They would just sit there and like try to get all the bugs out of the screen, like hacking my installation so there would be nothing left. But I thought this is, these behaviors that emerge out of these types of simple interactions was certainly interesting for me to watch. But okay, so let me play the video of that, and hopefully the sound is okay. Or there's no sound. All right, we might just go without sound then. It's just background music anyway. There were also a few times I was trying to test this piece, and I remember I had the bugs on my hand in the projection and my keyboard out of reach, and I was like, I can't drop the bugs. I have to get my keyboard. So it even fooled myself in my own illusion. Okay. So this next piece we might need sound for. But this was, like I said earlier, I shortly after the Interactivos, I was in touch with Damien Stewart, who was an artist and a musician, and we decided to do a small collaboration together making this performance piece. And this was also a kind of weird concept I had about creating this kind of performance that would be two people playing some kind of fictional game, a sort of ritualistic game where they would cut off pieces of string and stretch it all across this board, building up different types of patterns. And then I would video track the patterns that they were creating. And so over time, there would be kind of more complex animations emerging inside of these patterns. So it was a bit of the concept of a hidden world coming to life, and they were kind of weaving these patterns together. And it would evolve from something sort of simple circles, cellular structures into something more organic. And then Damien was doing the sound design, and he would perform live, so there was an interaction with the sound and the visuals. And now, looking at Rosie's piece, I should have done it with stretch sensors, and then it would have been even better. So this, I don't know if we'll get sound on this one or not, but anyway. So this is something I've explored a number of times in my works, is these kind of hidden worlds coming to life, or you know, imagining that this alternative reality inside hidden spaces. I should be a noise musician, that's it. And then, of course, the finale of the piece is the destruction of the world. So they cut all of the strings off, and it's this kind of play on creationism, destruction. So besides this concept of sort of hidden worlds and illusions, I've also, as you'll see, I've used hands quite often in my work. And I mean, hands have a long history, presence in the history of art, but you know, hands are also an important interface. It's you know, one of the ways we communicate, and I was also thinking a lot about it as the part of the body that we can see most easily, most directly. And you know, one day I was talking about this with Marcos, and he told me that did I know that there were some languages where they had developed an octal counting system rather than a decimal system, because as the theory goes, I don't know if it's true, but you know, we have a decimal system because we have, you know, 5 fingers on each hand. But then some people would count the spaces, the negative space between their fingers, and these languages developed octal counting systems. So base 8, the title of my piece. And so I found this was really interesting, and I developed this piece that I wanted to make an exploration of the negative space around the body, and particularly, these kind of subtle movements of the hand and arms and fingers. And it developed into this work where you could move inside this constructed space and see this sort of floating world that would start to come to life between your body movements. And in this case, I did it using an optical effect, using this kind of Pepper's Ghost technique, which maybe some of you have heard of before. It's, the concept was that you wouldn't be, in this piece in particular, you wouldn't be looking at a video. You would look more directly at the hand as this world was kind of emerging in a sort of floating space. And in fact, you're looking through a piece of plexiglass at a reflection rather than at some kind of augmented video, which I did later on, but we'll see. And this type of effect comes from early theater, where they would try to put ghosts onto the stage, so that's why it's called Pepper's Ghost. And you would have some actor who would be positioned off stage or underneath the stage, and the audience would be looking through an angled piece of glass, and this ghost would appear on the stage, and you could swipe your hand through them, and it was this awesome illusion. And it's used in things like the Haunted Mansion in Disney World. These big productions where they put avatars on stage. Alexander McQueen put Kate Moss on the runway as this kind of fantastic ghost image. And of course, people sell this type of effect as super high-tech holographic displays, when it's actually just angled pieces of plexiglass and a clever rendering. But it looks quite beautiful, in my opinion, so good for them. They can make lots of money off that. You'll find lots of Kickstarter projects with 3D holographic displays, and it's Pepper's Ghost. So I used this, and the construction was something, in this format where you would be looking through the plexiglass, and there wasn't just an LCD screen up above, and because I had a black background, the images that would appear would seem to be floating in the space, and tracking people's movements using a depth sensor. So getting the contours of the hand. So here you can see where my tracking was not so good yet. And so as you moved, you would have these different types of animations coming to life. Unfortunately, my videos are all super dark. It's the problem of making installations that happen in the dark. So I thought, this effect was, I thought it still has a lot of artistic potential, so I decided to explore it again in another piece, but this time thinking about making sculptures, particularly augmented sculptures. And the concept was that I would create these kind of hybrid digital physical sculpture, where on the one hand I was going to make these generative physical forms, so creating some algorithms to generate different designs and fabricating them. And then at the same time, I wanted it to be kind of fused with the virtual component of it. So the same algorithms would be animated in a digital context, and then they would come together using this optical illusion to create a form where you know, it's one part physical, one part digital, and thinking about, you know, different, you know, how matter changes states. And so I experimented with a couple of different, you know, very simple forms, not too complex, and then working with some simple Voronoi patterns and particle systems to generate the structures. And the setup was actually not too complex. It was these kind of spatially just these three structures, and so you would have, you know, unless you were standing in one particular spot, you would see each thing individually. So you have the screen, you know, the actual fabricated physical object, and then this plexiglass. And when you were in one particular spot, these two forms would merge together and create the, you know, kind of the third piece. So here you go. And then when you move in front of, when you move in front of the screen, you can see it come together. And I designed it so that these structures were not, even though it's just a 2D plane floating in space, it would feel like they were part of the physical object, so kind of coming out of different parts of the structures, using some different types of masking techniques so it looks like they go behind, so creating different illusions inside that space. And then I also started playing with kind of a third dimension where you would have this screen below having one structure, you know, this other one coming out, and then the physical one on top, although I'm still developing that piece in a way. Okay, so here you can see a little bit of so here you can see it moving in front and behind. It's reflection. So it's like you have the LCD screen kind of behind you, and when you look through the glass, you see it reflected on the other side. So yeah, it's like that. Although recently I got to see a transparent LCD screen, which I also think could be pretty amazing to do something with. But this is just the optical illusion I was mentioning earlier. Okay, so the last piece I'm going to show you is one collaboration that I worked on with Golan Levin and Kyle McDonald, the Augmented Hand series. So this piece had a lot of different inspirations from all of us. And one of them for me was these studies I had been reading about one time where, I guess there's some psychological studies where they would you know, set up a situation where you would have two hands on the table, but instead of one of your hands, they would put a rubber hand there, and your real hand would be kind of hidden inside on the other side of a screen. And then they do these tests where you stroke both hands, and people would describe that they kind of had the sensation that the rubber hand was really their real hand. So kind of transposing their concept of their real hand onto this fake one. And people found it also works without the rubber hand at all, so this kind of invisible hand illusion. And for me it was intriguing because it talks a lot about how the mind's ability to adapt its concept of the body. So it's quite flexible. And this is very much related to kind of phantom limb syndrome, where people who've lost a limb still feel like they have one. And it's also a lot of research in this area is being done now through people who are interested in virtual reality, because of course in VR, you can make your entire body disappear. So how we can, think about the our mind's ability to project inside of a new concept of the body inside of a virtual space as well. And so this was something interesting to me. I found, this video recently, which I thought was pretty funny. So the piece we developed, that was just one of my background inspirations. I'll talk about some other afterwards. Was this piece called, where we would augment the image of your hand. So the idea is you put your hand inside this box, if you're brave enough, and you see a live video image of your hand on the screen in front of you, and then we manipulate that in different ways. So adding on an extra finger, splitting it into strange directions, taking a finger off, or kind of letting it move on its own. So in a way, the idea is that the hand kind of takes on a life of its own. So, is it your hand, or does it have its own kind of, is it its own entity in a way? This was one inspiration by Golan, who was remembering this Dr. Seuss story where he's talking about having, 11 hands, 11 fingers. Also the biologist Stephen Jay Gould, who talks about in his book that there's nothing specifically special or inevitable about having 5 fingers on each hand, and it may not even be evolutionarily optimal, right? I also had worked on a previous piece with Klaus Obermeier, and in one of the scenes of this, it was a dance performance, and in one scene we were kind of stretching out the dancer's hand, and it would split into 3, kind of becoming this strange, weird, snake-like structure. And when I was developing the piece, it was kind of one of my favorite scenes to have to debug, because it was kind of fun to play with. And then, of course, Tim Hawkinson, who has always done some really interesting works about the human body, and this was one of his pieces of these kind of fractal hands. And so this project, I think I can't remember when I had first talked to Golan about it, but it was quite a few years ago, and he had asked me if I had some ideas for new works, and I was talking to him about this concept of, stretching out the body or the fingers in some way. And he then opened up his sketchbook and showed me things he had made 3 years earlier that were the same concept, and said, okay, we should make this project. But it took us quite a few years to actually figure out how to do it, and to do it in a way that would be a convincing illusion. Because we couldn't figure out how to do it with the technology that we had then. And eventually we found the right sensors and the right people to work with, and we started developing the technical part of it. So on one hand, it was a challenge because we needed to track specifically the individual fingers, and in that we used the Leap motion controller. The Leap originally was not too reliable, but the second generation of its SDK was much better, so we used that for finding actually the real hand, and then mapping the 2D image that we would have to use background subtraction to really cut out the texture of the hand. So combining that with the depth information we had, and then being able to put that onto, a model that we had made that you could then puppeteer in different ways. So using this kind of puppeteering algorithm to manipulate different people's, manipulate their hands in unusual ways. So let's see a quick video. So this is Golan demoing a few of the different scenes that we invented. And this was, we showed it for the first time in a festival in Amsterdam. And there's a really nice moment where one of the kids, let's see. So this kid here, he looks in the box. So we're not sure if he's looking to see if his hand has changed or if it's really his real hand, but we saw this a few times, which was a really nice moment of, you know, people kind of trying to figure out this illusion. Okay, so I'm just going to end my talk today with a few quick words about our theme of possible worlds, Mundos, posibles. So this was what I had wrote on my approach to the workshop when I was asked to reflect on this. So the impact of technology may be empowering and illuminating or devastatingly destructive. Technology is an extension of the human experience and part of the human condition. Our creative engagement with the digital, with the electronic, and with code can bring about new forms of expression, new engagements of the senses, new augmentations of the human body, critiques of society and politics, open movements, open platforms, and new ways of thinking. You know, so even though it often feels like the world might be doomed, but as artists, designers, technologists, hackers, and dreamers, we can imagine other possible worlds and help start creating them. Thank you. So I don't know if we are doing questions or we have to...
Yes. Any questions, comments?
Thanks a lot, Chris, for this very beautiful and inspiring presentation. I know very little about, you know, open frameworks and computer vision and all this stuff, but I wonder, when you develop these works, you program some kind of a behavior into your little box or little stars that move around. To what extent does it get out of control? Like when you then start interacting, have you some experiences where something completely unexpected happened, although you did the code in the beginning?
Yes. Yeah, so I mean, the bugs, for example, they're moving with these sort of flocking algorithms where you set up the conditions and it just goes and it does its own thing. And yeah, for sure, I sometimes, in fact, yesterday I was setting up the piece with Danny downstairs, and he's like, "Oh, did you shut it down?" And I was like, "No, I was just watching the bugs. I mean, I like to watch them. They're moving in all of these weird ways. The physics inside of them explode sometimes, so they kind of go out of control as well. And in other pieces, it's more controlled. Actually, you know, the augmented hand one is very. We designed the algorithms quite specifically, so they're not really generative. But some of the works, yes, of course, they're generative systems where I set up the rules and then it just goes and we see what happens.
Because you made these nice references to historic ways of making illusions. Is there something fundamentally different if we use these programmed behaviors? Like, because it's less controlled than this ghost projections, it's this actor there, some mirrors, and it's presented there. So if we include these programmed kind of behaviors with code, this is the fundamental difference, you would think, that it creates unexpected visuals or illusions?
So the question is there's a difference between these historic ways of creating the illusions, but now we can have unexpected results? Yes, I think so. I mean, I think it's one of the things, potentials in technology now, and particularly now that artificial intelligence is becoming very popular, is that we are creating systems that we don't really know always how they work, which is both scary and interesting at the same time. And I think that's a powerful way, or an interesting way of working for artists.
So, thank you very much, Chris, for your very beautiful talk. I was curious because I think I remember that when you presented your proposal for the Interactivos in 2007,
yes,
you already had also an idea for doing this thing of the augmented hand or arm. Is it? Do you remember that you presented like 2 proposals and one of them was already related to that? So you had already started with this idea like some years ago.
Yes, this is exactly what I was saying. I had this idea quite a long time ago, and it took a very long time to actually figure out how to do it, until first I talked to Golan, and then eventually we found a way to make the project. But you're right, I did propose that in 2007. You should have taken it as well. But yeah.
Any other question or comment? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please.